This is the Apocrypha. You brothers and sisters can purchase this online. Okay, this book is called the Apocrypha. It's another part of the Bible that was taken out, okay, by Martin Luther, then later on the Roman Catholic Church.
Rebel Alliance media criticized their former church for teaching that the Catholic Church is responsible for removing the so-called Apocrypha from the King James Bible. Now, that teaching is patently false, and it's obviously false to anyone with even a basic knowledge of the controversy between Catholics and Protestants over the canon of the Bible. Back in around 2004, when I would browse the forum of the Holy Conception Unit site, which was the official webpage of the Israelite Church of God in Jesus Christ, I was surprised to see on that forum that the teachers from the Israelite Church of God in Jesus Christ were flatly saying that the Roman Catholic Church removed the Apocrypha from the King James Bible, and that Catholics don't use the Apocrypha, and so on. Elsewhere on the internet, I saw members of another splinter group, the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge in Washington, D.C., saying the same thing. The Truth After Knowledge forum, on there I've seen UPKers from different groups who've appeared and claimed that the Roman Catholic Church removed the Apocrypha from the King James Bible. As you saw at the beginning of this clip, there's Bun Loya, who's a former member of the House of Israel group, and is now apparently Lions of Israel, and he also claimed the Roman Catholic Church removed the Apocrypha. They're still pushing the same claim about the Roman Catholic Church removing the Apocrypha from the Bible. None of the different groups has bothered to do even 30 seconds worth of research on the subject. That speaks volumes about how little study the average UPKer does. In response to the slight modification that the Great Millstone Group has made to this common UPKer tradition, rather than just saying the Roman Catholic Church took the Apocrypha out of the Bible, they quote some fringe book titled To Eliminate the Opiate, which makes a passing reference to an obscure group called the Biblical Destruction Group. And from there, the men in Great Millstone leaped to the conclusion that this group removed the so-called Apocrypha from the King James Bible in 1826. They don't provide any evidence, rather they just put the claim out there for their followers to... Even though they have shifted the blame from the Roman Catholic Church to some alleged Biblical Destruction Group, the argument is basically the same. It shows a complete ignorance of the history of the disputes over the biblical canon, and it assumes that the so-called Apocrypha was taken out of the Bible, specifically by the white man or something like that, some shadowy group, and that he did so because he was afraid of the content in the Bible, in the Apocrypha. So, for example, listen here to one of the members of Great Millstone explaining which verses the white man was afraid of, thus motivating him to remove the so-called Apocrypha.
Focusing on the Apocrypha and why it was taken out, but this is one of the scriptures why I believe it was taken out. All right, 2 Esdras 6, 7-9. Now, the two others that I have written down is 2 Esdras 13, 40-46, which describes about the 10 tribes coming over here to the Western Hemisphere. All right, I believe that's another reason why they had to take that out. And also 1 Maccabees, the 1st chapter, the 1st verse to the 9th verse, which speaks about Alexander the Creep coming into power. And it also says that when Alexander came into power, that's when wickedness was sown into the planet Earth. So basically, according to 1 Maccabees 1 and 9, it's basically telling you when the white man came into power, the so-called white man came into power underneath Alexander, that's when wickedness was sown in the earth. So what is it essentially calling the so-called white man? The wicked. So, they couldn't have that information out there.
To highlight how ridiculous their argument is, first note that the book they call 2nd Esdras is still in the Bibles of the Russian Orthodox Church, where it's listed as 3rd Ezra. It also appears in the Bibles of Eastern Rite Catholics who use Slavonic, such as the so-called Uniates, who are similar to the Russian Orthodox Church, only they're in communion with the Pope. As for 1 Maccabees, that appears in all the Bibles of the Catholic and Orthodox churches. Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Roman Catholic, whether they're Eastern or Western Rites, all of them have 1 Maccabees in their Bibles. These facts fly in the face of the claim that, the white man is terrified of these books and had to remove them from the Bible. So we should now ask the question, why do the books appear in some Bibles and not in others? And the answer has nothing to do with the wacky conspiracy theories that UPKers are pushing. Instead, it has to do with the belief held by many Christians that the Old Testament should reflect the biblical canon of the Jews. Now let's run through a brief history of the issue and, try and bring this out. As I just noted, throughout history there have been certain Christians who believe the Old Testament should mirror the Jewish canon. In Book 6 of his ecclesiastical history, Eusebius gives the Jewish canon as listed by Melito of Sardis, and also the canon listed by Origen. Both these men gave lists which were very close to the Tanakh as it is today. Melito's list was written in the 2nd century. The point is, by the time of such figures in the church, in the early churches, Melito and Origen, in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, the Jewish canon already lacked most of the books which appear in the so-called Apocrypha. Now, in the 4th century, we see, certain church fathers starting to appeal to the Jewish canon as the true Old Testament. Most famously, Saint Athanasius, in his 39th Festal letter, plainly presents the Old Testament canon, which is nearly identical to the Tanakh, to the Jewish canon. Now, Athanasius goes on to state that specifically the books of Judith, Wisdom, Sirach, Esther, and Tobit are not part of the canon, but are good for, at least good for catechetical instruction. That's something important to keep in mind, that distinction. They're not canonical, but you can use them for, they're good for reading, especially for people undergoing catechesis. Now, there were other church fathers who took a similar view. St. Jerome, who's the translator of the Vulgate, in his preface to his translation of the books of Kings, popularly called the Prologos Geleatus, Jerome flatly stated that books like Wisdom, Sirach, Tobit, and Judith are not part of the canon. And he explained that because they're not part of the Hebrew canon of the Jews, that is the Tanakh, they have to be considered apocryphal. And we should keep in mind that he used the word apocrypha as a slur. 1,000 years after the time of Jerome, in medieval Europe, Jerome began to gain a large amount of popularity among scholars. For example, in 1385, the preface to John Purvey's revision of Wycliffe's translation of the Bible specifically cited Jerome as an authority in questioning the canonicity of books like Tobit, Judith, and others, and he used the slur apocrypha. However, the translation kept the disputed text in the Old Testament. Now, a century later, one of the greatest Catholic scholars was Tommaso de Vio, who was in Spain, and was, because he was from a place in Italy called Gaeta, he was known as Gaetano, and then later Cajetano, and in English somehow Cajetano became Cajetan. Cajetano's commentary on the book of Esther, Tommaso de Vio, Cajetano, he appealed to Jerome's aforementioned Prologos Geleatus, which is the famous text where Jerome specifically rejects the so-called Apocrypha, and Cajetano appeals to this text and used the slur Apocrypha, specifically for Judith, Tobit, Maccabees, etc. Cajetano flatly said that they're not part of the canon, and then they can't be used to confirm positions of faith. Quote, "The words of the councils as well as the doctors are to be submitted to the correction of Jerome." End quote. In 1435, Martin Luther produced his German translation of the Bible. Luther also clearly defined the word apocrypha as a slur. He said, quote, "Apocrypha, that is, books which are not held equal to the sacred scriptures and nevertheless are useful and good to read." End quote. In 1535, the Miles Coverdale Bible had a preface which appealed to Jerome, just like Purvey and so on, and Cajetano. The Coverdale Bible's preface appealed to Jerome and flatly read as follows, quote, "Apocrypha, the books and treatises which among the fathers of old are not reckoned to be of like authority with the other books of the Bible, neither are they found in the canon of the Hebrew." End quote. This is the same Jerome which the preface of the original King James Version in 1611 called, quote, "a most learned father," end quote. Now, King James himself wrote a book titled Basilikon Doron, which gave his own position on the so-called Apocrypha. He wrote, quote, "As to the Apocrypha books, I omit them because I am no papist," end quote. In other words, while UPKers make the ridiculous claim that the Catholics removed the so-called Apocrypha from the Bible, their own beloved King James took the common Protestant position that only a Roman Catholic would consider those books to be divine scripture. Now, some UPKers have asked the question, if King James did not believe in the Apocrypha, why did it appear in the King James Version? The answer is that this was a common practice of all Protestant translations up to that point. The King James Version is a Protestant translation, and a Protestant translation would use the Apocrypha as a slur. Putting those texts in their own Apocrypha section was meant to establish them as being of an inferior quality. That's something that's very important to keep in mind. Bibles produced by believers in those texts kept them in the Old Testament. And if you don't believe me, you can see any Roman Catholic or Orthodox Bible, that those who believe in those texts and consider them scripture keep them in the Old Testament. Protestants, like certain ancient Christians, believe that the biblical canon should just be the Jewish Tanakh and the New Testament. What was once considered the Puritan view became the dominant and nearly unanimous view amongst all Protestants. This has nothing to do with secret societies and like the alleged biblical destruction group. And more importantly, Catholic and Orthodox Bibles continued to have those books in their Old Testament, and they continue to do so to this very day. Finally, in closing, I wanted to note something humorous I noticed in one of Great Millstone's videos about the Apocrypha. Here, listen to Origen Lob.
This right here is of the Spanish Bible, right? Right here you see Sagrada Escritura, which is sacred scriptures. Then it says Biblia, right? Now you notice in the índice, Antiguo Testamento, or the Old Testament, you have what? You got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And as you scroll around, you start seeing books like Primer Maccabeos, which is First Maccabees, Judith, Tobias, or Tobias, Second Maccabeos, Second Maccabees, Baruch, and other books that belong to the Apocrypha, because this is the original one, and they took it out. See?
What Origen Blob didn't seem to realize in that clip is that he was on the website of the Vicaría Episcopal de Pastoral Arquidiócesis de México, which is the Episcopal Vicariate of the Archdiocese of Mexico. Their website is vicariadepastoral.org.mx. This is a Roman Catholic site. The Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Mexico is the one who put up that site. And that was a modern Spanish translation. The reason those books are in the Old Testament is because that's a Catholic Bible. I found that humorous.